The first thing my daughter did when she saw me was cross the street. She didn't hesitate, didn't slow down, didn't look twice. She just angled her body away from the bench where I was sitting, pulled her coat a little tighter, and moved to the other side of the road with the practiced ease of someone who had learned long ago how to make certain people disappear. She had no idea she was walking away from her father. I watched her go. I sat with my hands in the pockets of a coat I had bought at a thrift store for $4, a brown canvas thing that smelled like someone else's life. And I watched my 53-year-old daughter cross the street to avoid a man she had decided, in a single glance, was not worth her time. I did not feel anger in that moment. I want to be clear about that. I felt something much quieter, much more final. I felt like I finally understood something I had been refusing to see for a very long time. My name is Eugene Marsh. I am 71 years old. I spent 40 years as a civil engineer designing bridges and infrastructure projects in and around Columbus, Ohio. I am not a dramatic man. I do not exaggerate. When I tell you that what my children revealed to me over 3 weeks changed everything I believed about who I had raised, I am simply telling you what happened. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. I grew up on the east side of Columbus, the second of 4 children. My father drove a delivery truck. My mother cleaned houses 3 days a week and held the rest of our life together on willpower and routine. We didn't have money, but we had values. You worked for what you wanted. You took care of people. You didn't look away when someone needed something you could give. I carried that my whole life. I met Carol at Ohio State in 1975. She was studying education. I was studying engineering. We married 2 years after graduation and spent the next 4 decades building something I was genuinely proud of, not because it was large or impressive, but because it was honest. A modest house, sensible cars, summer camping trips with the kids, a mortgage paid off 12 years early. We had 3 children. Renee, the eldest, born in 1971, Thomas, born in 1974, Kevin, our youngest, born in 1979. By any measure, they grew up well. Good schools, real opportunities, careers, and families of their own. Carol passed away 4 years ago. A stroke, sudden and without warning, on a Tuesday morning in April. She was in the garden. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was already over. Carol was the gravitational center of our family. She was the one who called everyone, organized the holidays, smoothed the tensions, remembered every birthday. When she was gone, the family didn't fall apart exactly, but it drifted. Slowly at first, then faster than I could track. Within a year of her death, I began to understand that my children's relationship with me had always been, in ways I hadn't recognized, a relationship with us, with what Carol and I represented together. Without her, I was just the old man in the house on Fenwick Street. The first sign came from Renee. She is a corporate attorney in Cincinnati, sharp, capable, the kind of woman who wins arguments the way other people breathe. For most of her life, she had been the child I felt most connected to. After Carol died, the calls became shorter, then less frequent, then occasional. When I phoned her, I could hear in her voice the particular quality of someone managing an obligation. Warm enough on the surface, absent underneath. I told myself she was busy. I told myself grief takes people differently. Thomas had moved to Phoenix 15 years earlier for a sales position that grew into a regional director role. He came back to Columbus twice a year, Thanksgiving and a summer visit, and was pleasant in the way of someone performing a role they've rehearsed in advance. What I noticed over those 2 years was that Thomas had developed opinions about what I should do with the house, always framed as concern, always beginning with, "What's best for you, Dad?" Always concluding with some version of a suggestion that I sell, simplify, liquidate, in a way that would, not coincidentally, produce a very clear picture of what I was financially worth. I am not a suspicious man, but I am an engineer. I follow the logic of structures, and the logic of Thomas's concern always led to the same place, Kevin was the youngest and the one who still lived in Columbus. He came for dinner on an irregular basis, borrowed money 3 times over the years for reasons that always made sense in isolation, and was the child who looked most like Carol, which sometimes made it hard to look at him directly. Kevin was also, as I slowly pieced together, the one who talked to the others most, the clearinghouse, the one who knew what everyone was thinking and passed it along selectively. I didn't understand what he was maintaining until much later. The idea came to me in February, 14 months after Carol died, on a Sunday afternoon. I had just gotten off the phone with Renee, 11 minutes, on a Sunday. She had an early meeting Monday. I sat in the armchair by the window, the same chair where Carol used to bring me coffee on weekend mornings, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, something quieter. I felt like a stranger in my own family, not unloved exactly, but unseen. Already somehow past tense in the minds of the people I had spent my life building toward. I called my oldest friend, Roy Decker. We had worked together for 30 years and retired the same year. Roy had grown up poor in ways that left marks on him. He tested people before he trusted them, a habit I had found slightly exhausting for decades, and now, sitting in that armchair, understood completely. I told Roy what I was thinking. He was quiet for a moment. "Eugene," he said, "that's either the saddest thing I've ever heard or the smartest, possibly both." We planned it over 3 weeks. Roy's idea to get the coat from the thrift store. My idea to position myself in locations each child frequented so the encounters would seem random. Roy would observe from his parked car. I would sit. I would see what I saw. I want to be honest about my expectations. I did not expect my children to invite a stranger to dinner. I expected basic decency, a nod, $1 in a cup, a moment of acknowledging that another human being existed and was cold. What I saw was different enough from that to matter. The bench where Renee crossed the street was in a park 3 blocks from her hotel. She was in Columbus for a deposition, and I knew she always walked through that park when she stayed at the Marriott on 4th. I had been there 40 minutes by the time she came down the path. I knew her walk from 50 yards, that particular combination of purpose and precision she had carried since childhood. Charcoal coat, briefcase in hand. Moving at the pace of someone, with somewhere important to be. When she was close enough that a normal person makes eye contact, she looked at me, registered me, made a decision, crossed the street without breaking her stride. She didn't look back. Roy texted from the car, "You okay?" I texted back, "Fine," moving to the next one. Thomas was in Columbus the following weekend visiting Kevin. I positioned myself outside a coffee shop on Kevin Street, 3 blocks from his apartment. At the time, I knew Thomas would walk for his morning coffee. Thomas came out of Kevin's building at 9:15. He walked toward me. He saw me before he had gone half a block, and I felt something shift in my chest. I thought, here it is. Here is the part where I am wrong about my son. He reached into his pocket. He took out his phone, looked at it, typed something, and walked past me without breaking stride. He was placing his coffee order on the app so he wouldn't have to wait inside. He walked past close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same one Carol had given him as a Christmas gift 20 years ago that had become a habit. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the cup. He collected his order and walked back past me, still on his phone, and was gone. Roy called instead of texting. "Eugene, you want to stop?" "No," I said, "one more." Kevin was the one I had saved for last. Not because I expected the worst, but because his reaction was the one that would matter most. He was the one still in my city, the one who looked like Carol, the one I had told myself, in the quiet negotiations you make about your children's characters, still genuinely cared. Kevin went to the same diner every Saturday morning, had done for years, a habit from his 20s that had outlasted jobs and relationships and everything else. I arrived before him. I sat on the low wall outside, coat pulled up, cup on the concrete beside me. February in Columbus is a particular kind of cold, the kind that settles into you and stays, and I had been outside 40 minutes by the time Kevin's car pulled into the lot. He got out. He was on his phone. He walked toward the entrance with his head down, and then he looked up because people always look up before walking through a door. He saw me. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. First, automatic awareness of a person in need. Second, the beginning of an action, a slight lean forward, a hand moving toward a pocket. Third, a recalibration, a visible decision being made. He looked back at his phone. He reached the door. He pulled it open. Just before stepping inside, he glanced back at me. Not warmly, not with anything like recognition, just the brief glance of a man confirming that a minor inconvenience was staying where he'd left it. He went inside. I sat on that wall for 20 minutes, long enough for Kevin to eat most of his breakfast. I thought about Carol, about how she would have sat down next to a stranger on a wall in February. She would have asked his name. She would have found out something real about him inside the first 3 minutes, because she genuinely believed every person had something worth knowing. Our children had grown up watching that. They had grown up in a house where the door was open and the table was large and nobody got turned away. Somewhere between then and now, the door had closed. I walked back to Roy's car. I got in the passenger seat and Roy, who has known me since Reagan was president, didn't say anything for a long moment. He turned the heat up. He handed me the coffee he had been keeping warm in the cup holder. "Well," he said finally. "Well," I said back. We drove home in silence. I spent 2 weeks deciding what to do. I want to be careful here about the word revenge, because I think it's too small and too hot for what I was considering. I was not thinking about how to hurt my children. I was thinking about how to make them see. There is a difference. Hurting people changes nothing except the temperature of the room. Making someone see, clearly, in a way they cannot argue away, that is something that lasts. That is what Carol would have done. I wrote each child a letter, not an email. A handwritten letter on the good stationery Carol had kept in the desk drawer for 40 years. 3 letters, each personal and specific. Each one began the same way. I want to tell you about a morning in February. I described everything. The coat, the coffee cup, Roy in the car. I described where I had positioned myself and why. I described in plain language what I had seen each of them do. I did not editorialize. I did not call them cold or selfish or any of the words that might have been accurate but would have given them something to defend against. I just described what had happened as precisely as an engineering report and let the facts carry the weight. Then I wrote something different in each letter. To Renee, I wrote about a morning in 1983 when she was 12 years old and had seen a boy from her class eating alone on a park bench and brought him home for lunch without asking permission. Carol and I had watched from the kitchen window, not wanting to interrupt. I wrote, "I don't know what happened to the girl who did that. I hope she is still in there somewhere, underneath the coat and the briefcase. I would like to meet her again." To Thomas, I wrote about a road trip we had taken when he was 16, the 2 of us driving to see my father in Cleveland because my father was ill. Thomas had insisted on coming because he said, and I remembered this precisely, "You shouldn't have to do that alone, Dad." I wrote, "You understood something at 16 that I think you have since forgotten. That being present for someone who needs it is not a burden. It is the whole point." To Kevin, I wrote the hardest letter. I wrote about Carol, about how much he looked like her and how much that mattered to me and how lonely it is to be the only person left in a house full of someone else's absence. I wrote, "Your mother would have sat down next to a stranger in February. I don't say that to wound you. I say it because I think you know it is true and because that knowledge is something you could choose to do something with." I mailed all 3 letters on a Thursday. Then I called my estate attorney, Barbara Cho, and told her I had 2 things I needed her help with. She was thorough and professional and asked exactly the right questions. Thomas called first, 5 days later. 7 in the morning his time, which meant he had been awake for a while. He did not open with an apology. He opened with a challenge. "Dad, what was the point of that?" I told him the point was exactly what the letter described. He said he thought it was manipulative. I told him I thought walking past a person in need without a second glance was also a choice worth examining. A silence long enough to become something other than a pause. "Then I didn't know it was you." "I know," I said. Another silence. "That's the point, Thomas. You didn't know anything about that person except that he appeared to have less than you, and that was enough information for you to make a complete decision." He didn't respond to that directly. He asked about my health. He asked about the house. Then he asked, with what I believe was genuine discomfort, whether we could plan a real visit, not a holiday appearance, but an actual visit, just the two of us. I told him I'd like that. I meant it. Renee called 3 days later in the evening, which meant she had thought about the call all day before making it. She did something I hadn't expected. She cried. Not controlled or careful, but the real kind, sudden and ragged, the kind that surprises the person doing it. She told me she had read the letter 4 times. She had shown it to her husband Douglas. She said that since Carol died, she had been holding things at a distance because closeness, since her mother, felt like something she couldn't afford. She said she thought she was protecting herself and hadn't stopped to consider what that had cost me. I told her I understood. I told her I wasn't asking for hourly calls or perfect attendance. "I'm asking to be seen," I said. "I see you, Dad," she said. I believed her. I still do. Kevin came to the house. He didn't call first. He just showed up on a Saturday morning with a paper bag from a bakery and a look on his face that reminded me so precisely of Carol, in the middle of an apology that I had to grip the doorframe before I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, where he had eaten 1,000 meals, done his homework, played cards with Carol on Sunday evenings, and he put the bag down and said, "I've been thinking about what I've been doing and what I've stopped doing." He told me that after Carol died, he had started pulling away not because he didn't care, but because the house felt too full of her. That every visit made him feel her absence so loudly he didn't know how to sit still in it. He thought that by visiting less, he could manage how much it hurt. I sat across from my youngest child, 50 years old now, a little gray, Carol's jawline in his face, and I said, "Kevin, that is exactly how I feel every single day. And I'm here every day anyway." He looked at the table. "I know," he said quietly, "I know." We ate the pastries from the bag. We talked for 3 hours, really talked, about Carol, about grief, about the size of what we had both been carrying alone. When he left, he hugged me in the doorway for a long time. Now for the part that had lasting consequences. "I told you I had called Barbara, my estate attorney. Here is what I asked her to build." I restructured my estate to include what Barbara called a character clause. It was not punitive. It was conditional. The house and the bulk of my assets would pass to my children equally, as always, but with one specific provision. Distribution would be managed by an independent trustee appointed jointly by my church and by Roy. The trustee's role was simple. In the 2 years following my death, they would assess whether my children were maintaining genuine relationships with each other, with my grandchildren, and with the broader community. Specifically through a family pledge I asked each of them to sign. The pledge asked for 12 hours per year of documented volunteer service. One meaningful family gathering annually, not a holiday performance, but something planned with real intention. And a written acknowledgement once of what they had received in their lives and from whom. If they honored the pledge, they received everything I had to leave them. If they didn't, the estate would pass to the charities Carol had supported for decades, a list in her own handwriting, kept in the same desk drawer as the stationery. I told each child about this in person, in individual conversations. not as a threat, as an explanation of what I had come to believe. That inheritance should not be something that simply happens to people. It should be something they participate in earning, not through money or labor, but through the continuation of the values that created it in the first place. Thomas was quiet for a long moment after I explained it. Then he said, "That's fair, Dad." Just that, nothing more. Renee called it, "typically you," in a tone that was half rueful and half something that sounded like respect. Kevin signed the pledge first. He signed it at the kitchen table, then asked if he could keep a copy. I told him that seemed excessive. He laughed, a real laugh, sudden and young-sounding. And it was the first time in 4 years that one of my children's laughter had filled that kitchen without Carol's there alongside it. It wasn't her laugh, but it was real, and it was here. I still have the coat. The brown canvas thrift store coat, $4, kept in the closet at the end of the hall. Roy has told me more than once that keeping it is a form of self-punishment. Roy, who has known me for 30 years, is usually right about these things. But I don't think I keep it for punishment. I think I keep it because it reminds me of what that February morning gave me, beyond the evidence it gathered. It reminded me of what it feels like to be invisible. And I was invisible for 40 minutes, and it cracked something open in me that needed to be cracked, because the truth I have had to sit with, the part I am not proud of, is that I had made myself invisible by degrees long before that morning. I had answered the short phone calls with cheerfulness. I had met the infrequent visits with gratitude. I had managed my aloneness quietly and without complaint, the way my generation was raised to do, and in doing so, I had made it very easy for my children to let the distance grow. I was not entirely a victim of what happened. I was a participant in it. That does not excuse what they did, but it is a truth I carry. What I know now, sitting in the armchair by the window where Carol used to bring me coffee, the armchair that is no longer just a piece of furniture in a quiet house, but a seat in a home where my children come on Sundays and my grandchildren run through the kitchen. What I know is this: love that is never tested is not love. It is habit, and habits can fade without anyone noticing until the thing you needed is already gone. I tested mine. I used a $4 coat and a paper cup in the cold air of a February morning. I used 11 days of stubble and the patience of a good friend in a parked car. I used the skill I had spent 40 years developing, the ability to look at a structure clearly, without sentiment, and see exactly where it was failing before it fell. The structure was failing, I shored it up. That is what engineers do. That is, I have come to understand, what fathers do too, not just once when the children are small and the needs are obvious, but all the way to the end. Whenever the end comes, you keep your eyes open, you keep building, you do not mistake silence for safety or distance for peace. Carol would have done it differently. She would have sat down next to the stranger and asked his name and had him at the dinner table by Thursday. She would have found the warmer way, the way she always did. But she would have done something. She never would have crossed the street. I think that is the standard I was always trying to hold us to. Hers. I just needed a February morning and a coat that smelled like someone else's life to remember it clearly enough to act. Kevin came by last Saturday with his daughter Maya, who is 8 and has decided my garden is her personal project. She spent 2 hours in early spring mud planning where everything would go. She looked up at me at one point, mud on her knees, completely unbothered, and said, "Pop, why do you have an old dirty coat in your closet?" I told her it was a long story. She said, "I like long stories." She does. She gets that from her great-grandmother. So I told her,